You? You were never her granddaughter, just a leech she forgot to cut off. But what they didn't know was that the woman they cast out held the one secret that could ruin them all. Let me tell you what happened. The scent of lilies still lingered from my grandmother's funeral when my parents handed over my sister the deed, my $10 million inheritance, without even meeting my eyes. The murmur of low conversations hung heavy in the air, broken occasionally by the clink of glass or the creak of the old wooden floors of our family estate. The October breeze carried a chill that slipped past the windows, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was the sight before me. Savannah, standing tall in her designer heels, clutched the deed like a trophy. Her ruby-red lipstick curled into a smile as our father clasped her hand in congratulations. Mom dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, pretending to be moved. But I saw the corners of her lips twitch. Pride, not grief. I stood silently at the side of the room, still in my black dress, arms folded tightly against my chest. My grandmother's favorite brooch, a modest garnet pin shaped like a lily, was the only piece of jewelry I wore. She had told me once, "The strongest storms come just before the sun." At the time, I thought she was just being poetic. But now that storm was inside me, rising. "You've done so much for this family," Mom cooed, brushing Savannah's arm. "And she's always been so responsible," Dad added, shooting me a glance that lasted less than a breath. "Lauren's a bit too soft for this kind of responsibility." My mouth went dry. I stepped forward. Wait, this was meant for me. Grandma said, "She told me." Robert cut me off without turning. "She changed her mind. It's in the new will. You've been written out." I blinked. "Written out? Why?" "For your own good," Mom chimed in, voice syrupy. "You're too sensitive, Lauren. Always have been. We didn't want you burdened." Savannah's eyes slid to mine, cold and triumphant. "It's just business, Lauren. Grandma knew I'd handle it better." I laughed, a hollow, cracking sound. Business? That estate was her life. She built it after Grandpa died. She raised us there, and she told me I was the one meant to take care of it. Dad stepped forward. "Stop it." "I have every right to see that will," I said, voice sharpening. "Where is it?" Mom raised her hand like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Don't embarrass yourself." I stared at them all. My parents, my sister, the cousins watching from corners. Too polite to speak, too weak to interfere. My fingers trembled as I reached for my purse, feeling the slip of paper Grandma had pressed into my hand a week before she passed. She said to open it only when the time came. I hadn't yet. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Not until someone shows me that will." Savannah tilted her head. "Lauren, don't make a scene." Dad's hand clamped down on my arm, hard. "Enough." I yanked back, but he didn't let go. "You're acting hysterical." "I'm grieving," I hissed. "There's a difference." He turned to Mom. "Open the door." Diane nodded, striding toward the entrance like this was all a formality. I twisted in his grip, trying to pull free, but he shoved me forward. My heels caught the edge of the rug and I stumbled, landing on the marble foyer with a thud that echoed louder than the murmurs. Then the door opened. Wind rushed in, cold and sharp. I looked up. They were all staring. No one moved. No one stopped it. "Get out, Lauren," my mother said softly. "You're making things difficult." I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my skirt. But before I could speak, Savannah stepped forward and flicked something at me. The brooch I'd dropped. It landed at my feet like a taunt. I bent down, picked it up, and clutched it tightly. Dad gave me one final push, and then I was outside. Alone. The door slammed shut behind me. I stood on the front lawn, stunned, shaking. The October sky above was cloudless, cruelly beautiful. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime rang. I looked up at the house, my house, where generations of our family had lived, where I had spent every summer with Grandma Margaret, learning how to prune roses and bake lemon pies. And now it had been handed over like a party favor. I felt the note in my purse again, unopened, waiting. As the door slammed behind me, I whispered to myself, they have no idea what Grandma left behind. I hadn't spoken a word to anyone for 2 days, not even to Jasmine, my closest friend, until I opened Margaret's locked box. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Even the ticking of the kitchen clock felt intrusive. Rain tapped softly against the window pane, each drop a slow, deliberate drumbeat in the fog of my mind. My grandmother's funeral had ended just 48 hours ago, but time had stretched thin and strange since then, as though grief warped it. The box sat on the small wooden table in my living room, a heavy, metallic rectangle the color of dull pewter, with a brass latch and a lock I hadn't dared to open. I had stared at it for hours. Margaret had handed it to me 2 weeks before she passed, with her usual quiet clarity. "This is for emergencies only, Lauren," she'd said, her fingers soft but firm around mine. "Don't open it unless you feel the storm has come." And now here I was, drenched by it. Jasmine had texted a dozen times. She knew something was wrong. Of course she did. But I couldn't bear to speak. Not yet. How could I tell her that my own parents had cast me out like a stranger? That Savannah now slept in the bed where I once played tea party with Margaret, in the house I was meant to inherit? I wrapped my fingers around the key, the one Margaret had taped behind a framed photo in my hallway, and slid it into the lock. The click echoed louder than expected. The lid creaked as I opened it, revealing a thick manila envelope, a velvet pouch, and a letter folded neatly in Margaret's unmistakable cursive. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope first. Inside were documents, formal, notarized, and embossed with gold stamps. I skimmed them, heart hammering faster with every line. Margaret Elizabeth Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, hereby creates a separate trust. Beneficiary, Lauren Grace Whitmore. Total value, $10 million US. I froze. Not Savannah, not the family. Me. This wasn't the same estate they had handed over to my sister. This was separate. A completely independent trust. Hidden from everyone but me. I sifted through the papers again, more carefully this time. There was no loophole, no ambiguity. She had set this up months ago, before her last hospitalization. It was real. My breath hitched. Then I opened the letter. "Dearest Lauren, if you're reading this, they've already done what I feared. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Through betrayal, not love. There are things I couldn't say aloud. Your parents, they never approved of how close we were, how much I trusted you. They never saw your strength the way I did. That's why I created this trust. It's separate from the estate. It's yours, protected. Use it when they try to erase you. You have more power than you realize. Use it wisely. My attorney is Felicia Morgan. She knows what to do. Find her. With all my love, Grandma Margaret." The letter fell into my lap. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. I could see her in my mind's eye, the last time I visited her in the garden, weak, frail, but alert as ever. She had looked at me like she was trying to memorize my face. I thought it was because she knew her time was running out. But now I saw the truth. She knew they would betray me. She had seen it coming, and she had prepared for it. "You prepare for war when there's still peace," she'd always said. I had always thought she was being dramatic, a holdover from some Southern Belle toughness coated in metaphors. But she wasn't just poetic. She was strategic. I reached into the velvet pouch. Inside was a slim gold flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the folder titled "For Lauren." There were scanned copies of the trust, asset summaries, and even a video file. But I didn't press play. Not yet. A knock sounded at the door. I jumped. "Lauren?" Jasmine's voice came through. "Are you in there? I brought soup." I hesitated. My hand hovered near the letter, still trembling. But then I took a breath, folded it, and stood up. I unlocked the door. Jasmine stepped in, her eyes widening at the mess of documents spread across the table. "Oh my God. Are you okay?" "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "But I'm going to be." She looked at me, then down at the papers. "What is all this?" "My grandmother's real will," I whispered. "The one nobody else knows about." As I moved to sit again, my eyes drifted back to the final line of Margaret's letter. I stared at the final line of the letter. "The lawyer I trust is Felicia Morgan. Find her." Felicia Morgan didn't answer her phone the first 3 times. But when she finally did, she said, "I was wondering when you'd called." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. It unnerved me, but also intrigued me. It wasn't the tone of someone surprised. It was the tone of someone waiting. I clutched the phone tighter. "This is Lauren Whitmore. Margaret was my grandmother." "I know who you are," Felicia said. "Come by tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Bring everything." Then she hung up. The storm hadn't started yet, but the sky was smeared in gray and the wind had a whisper to it, the kind that made trees bend just a little more than they should. I barely slept that night. My mind replayed Margaret's letter over and over again. Her trust in this woman, this stranger, was absolute. "She knows what's fair," Margaret had said once when I asked why she chose Felicia over the family's usual lawyer. "She doesn't play politics," she added. "She plays the truth." By 8:45 the next morning, I was parked outside a modest brick building tucked between a dry cleaner and a diner. No gleaming skyscraper or marble lobby, just a painted door with peeling numbers and a small plaque. Felicia Morgan, Esker. Inside, the office smelled faintly of old paper and brewed coffee. Stacks of files lined every available surface, but they were organized, like a battlefield ready for war. The receptionist waved me toward the glass-walled room at the end of the hall. Felicia stood when I entered. She was shorter than I expected, dressed in a navy pantsuit with sleeves rolled slightly past her wrists. Her hair, silver-streaked and pinned back, gave her a stately kind of presence. She gestured to the seat across from her desk without a word. I slid into it, unzipped my satchel, and placed the lockbox contents on the table. The letter, the trust, the flash drive. Felicia picked up the trust first, scanning with eyes that missed nothing. She flipped each page, her brow tightening only once. Notarized properly. Witnessed. Dated well before the public will. She looked up. This wasn't drawn under duress. Margaret was fully lucid when she signed this. "She gave it to me," I said. "Told me to keep it safe." Felicia nodded. "That tracks. Margaret was deliberate with everything. She knew how to move pieces before others realized there was even a game." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Then it's real? I mean, it holds up?" "It's real," Felicia confirmed. "And legally separate. This trust doesn't depend on the estate's public will. It exists outside of it. As long as no one contests it successfully, this money is yours." Relief swelled in my chest, but it was short-lived. "There's a catch, isn't there?" I asked. Felicia leaned back. "The catch is timing. The trust is secure, yes, but if your family finds out, they might launch a challenge. Claim Margaret wasn't in her right mind when she created it. Or worse, that you coerced her." I know. But the truth isn't what gets argued in court, Lauren. It's what can be proven. And you've just become very interesting to a very greedy family. I sat quietly, absorbing the weight of that. "I want to be careful," I said finally. "No drama, no big fight. Just, what's mine?" Quietly. Felicia smiled. "You've come to the right place, then. We'll stay silent for now. Let them believe they've won. But while they're celebrating, we gather." "Gather what?" "Evidence. Emails, medical records, witnesses. Anything that shows Margaret was in full control when she created this trust. and anything that shows how your family behaved around her near the end. A memory bubbled up. Savannah at the hospital, lounging at Margaret's bedside with her tablet, bragging to a cousin that everything was finally locked in. She said something once, I murmured, that the new will was set just days before Grandma passed, that it was airtight, like she knew exactly what was being changed. Felicia's eyes sharpened. When was this? 3 days before Margaret died. I thought it was just Savannah being smug. She might have been more than smug. She might have been manipulating. There's a legal term for it, undue influence. If she or your parents pressured Margaret during her final days, it could explain the shift in the estate's will. I leaned forward. But the trust came before that. Exactly, Felicia said, which means it might carry more legal weight, especially if we can prove that the will they're using was altered under pressure. She began writing notes in a crisp hand. For now, don't confront anyone. Don't let them know you've seen a lawyer. If they think you've walked away, they'll get sloppy. I swallowed hard. And if they don't? Then we make sure we're 5 steps ahead. Lightning cracked somewhere outside, brightening the room for a second before thunder followed. Rain started tapping against the glass walls, soft at first, then steadier. It sounded like war drums. I looked at Felicia, calm, calculating, firm. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a general. She closed the folder slowly and met my eyes. You're not just fighting for your money, Lauren, Felicia said. You're fighting to expose who your family really is. I thought losing the inheritance was enough, until I discovered my name had also been erased from Margaret's foundation records. There's a kind of betrayal that strikes silently, not with screaming or broken glass, but with the absence of something you thought was permanent, like a name. The front desk receptionist at the Charleston Youth Legacy Initiative gave me a polite smile when I walked in. The place looked the same. Polished floors, rows of framed photos lining the corridor, bright posters celebrating community service. But I could already sense something was off. Subtle, sterile. I hadn't been back here since Margaret's funeral. She and I co-founded the center 7 years ago. What started as a summer tutoring program for low-income students had grown into a full-blown nonprofit. Margaret always said it was her proudest project. Ours. The plaque on the lobby wall used to read, "Founded by Margaret Whitmore and Lauren Whitmore, 2016. Now it said, "Founded by Margaret Whitmore. Continued by Savannah Whitmore." My stomach flipped. I moved closer, blinking as if my eyes might correct what they were seeing. But no, my name wasn't there. Not even in the footnote of the dedication blurb. "Excuse me," I said to the receptionist, my voice a little too calm. "Can I speak with whoever manages foundation records?" She looked up. "Oh, that would be Tanya. I'll page her." Before she could finish, Jasmine pushed through the door behind me. I hadn't told her I was coming here, but I should have known she'd find out. "You're not going to believe what I saw," she hissed, then caught the look on my face. "Wait, what happened?" I just pointed to the plaque. Her eyes narrowed. "They erased you." Tanya, the program coordinator, approached a moment later. She looked flustered the second she saw me. "Lauren, hi, we weren't expecting you." "I'm sure," I said. "I have a few questions." Tanya led us into her small office, which was tucked behind the main conference room. It was modest but clean. Binders labeled by year, laminated event flyers, a wall calendar filled with sticky notes. After Margaret passed, the family requested we update some of the public materials, Tanya said, avoiding my eyes. Savannah sent over the new bios and funding statements. "And you just complied?" Jasmine asked, her voice rising. Tanya winced. The Whitmore estate was very specific. We were told Lauren had stepped away voluntarily and that Savannah would now oversee all Whitmore family contributions. "I didn't step away," I said. "No one even asked me. I co-founded this with Margaret. There are legal documents, press photos, speeches." Tanya hesitated, then opened a filing cabinet behind her desk and pulled out a thick blue folder. I didn't delete anything. We keep archives of all founding documents. Inside the folder were brochures from the launch event, a photo of me and Margaret cutting a red ribbon, and, most importantly, the original 2016 charter. My name signed beside hers. I reached for the folder, but Tanya held it a moment longer. You should know, she said softly. We still have the digital versions, too. I didn't overwrite them. I wasn't comfortable deleting history. Jasmine snorted. That makes one of us. I took a shaky breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to scream, but I needed to think. This needs to be documented, I told Tanya. Every change, every email from Savannah or my parents about these revisions. I'll compile them, Tanya said quietly. And I'll give you a copy of the full archive. As we stepped out into the lobby, I felt a bitter ache growing deeper in my chest. This wasn't just about money. They wanted me erased. From memory, from history, as if I'd never mattered. As if I was just a shadow next to Savannah's spotlight. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A text from Felicia. You need to see what I found in the probate court filings. Now ChatGPT Jane Noi. Felicia J Yentin Cho Jengio. Nunki toi buok vao fong kwako. Tai kwako rung lak tran mot chong tai liu. She didn't greet me, just gestured silently to the chair across from her and pushed a manila folder toward me. Her knuckles were white against the tabletop. The overhead light flickered slightly, casting shadows across her eyes, making her look older than usual, or maybe just more tired. I assume this isn't just light reading? I asked as I took my seat. No, she said hoarsely. This is war. I opened the folder. 2 copies of Margaret's will lay side by side, both notarized, both stamped, but not identical. I scanned the documents quickly. The formatting was the same, the headers, the font, but one listed me explicitly as a beneficiary of half the estate, while the other did not. In fact, in the second version, the one that had been publicly filed, my name appeared only once, buried in a paragraph that acknowledged me as Margaret's estranged granddaughter. I felt a chill travel down my spine. I don't understand, I said, even though I already did. Felicia pointed to the dates. This one, she said, tapping the version where I was included, was notarized on October 2nd, exactly 4 weeks before Margaret died. She was in stable condition at the time. No mental impairment, no medical confusion. We have 2 witnesses who signed and a notary with a clean record. She paused. This one, she said, tapping the second will, the one that excluded me, was filed 3 days after her death. But look at the signature. I leaned in. At first glance, it looked identical. Margaret's cursive always had that distinctive swirl in the W of Whitmore. But on closer inspection, the pen pressure was different. Heavier, uneven. Almost like someone had tried to mimic it with too much force. Felicia placed a third document on the desk, a signature verification report. I had a handwriting analyst review both. This second one, the filed version, shows signs of tracing. The loops are unnatural. There's evidence the ink bled more than it should, suggesting hesitation. And the pressure points indicate a left-handed signer. Margaret was right-handed. I blinked. So, someone forged it. Felicia nodded. That's my suspicion. But proving it in court requires more than suspicion. We need a timeline, witness statements, and motivation, I said. Exactly. I sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. This wasn't just an inheritance dispute. This was fraud. Criminal fraud. Someone, likely Diane, possibly Savannah, had fabricated a will to cut me out completely. And the original legal one, the one Margaret had signed while still lucid, had been buried. My heart pounded as flashes of Margaret in her hospital bed filled my mind. The way she clutched my hand and whispered that she trusted me. The tired look in her eyes, but the sharpness of her words. She wasn't confused. She wasn't delusional. She was deliberate. They thought no one would check, I said. They thought I'd just disappear quietly. Felicia's lips twisted into a bitter smile. They underestimated you, and they forgot about me. Her desk phone buzzed, but she ignored it. Her hands steadied now as she began placing documents into a new binder. This changes the entire nature of the case, she said. It's no longer just about challenging a will. It's about exposing a criminal conspiracy. If we can prove they deliberately filed a forged version, their claim to the estate could be invalidated completely. I stared at the papers in front of me. They still looked surreal, like fiction. And what happens if we win? The public will is thrown out. The trust stands untouched, and the estate could revert to the last verified legal document, Margaret's original will, the one naming you. My fingers ran over the smooth surface of the table. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for the truth, for Margaret's name, for my own. What if they fight back? I asked. What if they come after me? Felicia didn't flinch. They will, with everything they've got, lies, threats, maybe even blackmail. But I've been through worse, and I don't lose to cowards. There was steel in her voice. It calmed something deep inside me. I looked at her, at the woman Margaret had trusted with everything. They don't know what's coming, I said quietly. Felicia slid the binder to me. Let's make sure they don't have time to prepare. I stood slowly, gathering the files. Each page felt heavier than the last, as if the ink itself carried the burden of betrayal, but also justice. I walked to the door, then turned back. They think I'm still grieving, I said. Felicia raised an eyebrow. Aren't you? Yes, I replied. But now I'm grieving with a purpose. And as I reached for the doorknob, I paused, turned slightly, and looked her in the eye. Then let's burn them. Legally. The only thing more dangerous than a forged will is a forged will someone thinks no one will ever find. The train ride to Vermont was long and gray, cutting through early morning fog like a knife through old gauze. I didn't sleep. I didn't talk to anyone. My mind ran through every conversation I'd had with Margaret in the last few months of her life. Every time she had reached for her cane with trembling hands. Every time her voice lowered when she mentioned Diane or Savannah. Margaret's apartment was tucked inside an aging red brick complex just outside Montpelier. The trees had already begun to yellow, their brittle leaves scattering across the walkway, as if nature itself was shedding the dead weight of the past. I arrived just after noon, carrying nothing but a rolling suitcase and a notebook stuffed with Felicia's questions. The building superintendent met me at the entrance. Mr. Dobbs was the kind of man who wore the same wool vest year-round and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. He scowled as if annoyed by my presence, but his tone was surprisingly civil when I introduced myself. You're Margaret's granddaughter, huh? He muttered, eyeing my face. Didn't know she had one that looked like she belonged in the city. She didn't talk much about us, I replied, and he seemed to accept that. He fished out a rusted ring of keys from his jacket pocket and led me up 3 flights. The air grew colder with each step. When we reached 3B, he unlocked the door, hesitated, then handed me the key. Hasn't been touched since she passed. No one's been in. Not even the family. That last part was a lie, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. I stepped inside and was hit by the smell of lavender and old paper. Everything was as she had left it. Floral curtains drawn halfway, a porcelain tea set on the table, one of those fuzzy blankets draped over the armchair she loved. I could still see her there, lips pursed, reading glasses perched low as she solved yet another crossword puzzle. I took a long breath and closed the door behind me. Felicia, I whispered into my phone, barely waiting for her to pick up. I'm inside. Don't touch anything yet, she instructed, her voice sharp. Document everything, photos, notes. You're looking for original copies, the trust, her journal, and anything that might confirm her mental state during the final weeks. The search began. Margaret's desk was the first place I looked, a weathered oak slab beneath a faded lamp. The top drawers held the usual. Pens, stamps, unopened envelopes from charity foundations. But the bottom right drawer was locked. I knew the key would be close. Margaret wasn't the type to store something without giving herself easy access. I checked under the desk mat, inside the base of her lamp, and finally, bingo, behind a loose panel in the drawer above. A tiny brass key wrapped in masking tape. The lock clicked open. Inside were folders, all neatly labeled. Medical records, personal letters, calendars. But what stopped my breath were the audio tapes. Voice memos, actually. Recorded on a clunky handheld recorder tucked at the very back. I pressed play on the first tape. October 5th. Margaret's voice crackled through the static. Savannah came again today. She brought Diane. They keep asking about the will. I told them I'm not ready, but I saw Diane eyeing the drawer. I locked it. My throat went dry. Another recording, dated just a few days later. They're pushing harder. Savannah keeps telling me Lauren is too fragile, that she'll waste the money. But I know my girl. I see the strength they pretend not to see. My hands were trembling as I pulled out the next file folder, this one labeled Will Drafts. Inside was a document, undated but clearly recent. Margaret's handwriting was shaky but familiar. My name was right there, underlined once in blue ink. This wasn't the same will Felicia had. It looked like a personal draft, one Margaret had prepared herself but never got notarized. But why hadn't she filed it? What had stopped her? A noise from behind made me jump. Mr. Dobbs stood in the doorway, arms folded. You all right in here? I nodded, trying to keep my tone even. Just remembering. He grunted. Wasn't gonna say nothing, but... He rubbed his chin, hesitant. Your mama, Diane, was it? Yes, I said sharply. She came here. Day before the coroner showed up. Said she forgot some old letters. Wouldn't let me go up with her. He looked me in the eye. Didn't sit right. A cold, hollow thump echoed in my chest. You're sure? I asked. Positive, he said. Had her hair done up like she was going to brunch, not a hospital. I thanked him and let him go. Then I sank onto the couch, surrounded by the weight of a dozen truths finally surfacing. They had been here. Diane had come, perhaps to search, to destroy, to rewrite history in their favor. But she hadn't found everything. I held up the draft of the will and the recorder, my heart thudding. The pieces were coming together. Margaret hadn't just tried to protect me financially. She'd left breadcrumbs for me to follow. And now I had proof not only of their betrayal, but of their desperation. Because only the guilty rush to silence the past. Savannah smiled on the local news, calling herself Margaret's true heir. I hit pause and stared at her lips. The same ones that had lied for years. The rain outside drummed steadily against the windows, a muted metronome that kept time with the thudding of my heart. My apartment was cloaked in dim light, the only illumination coming from the bluish glow of my laptop screen. Savannah's face was frozen mid-sentence, her eyes sparkling with practiced sincerity. Her hair was curled just the way our mother liked it. Perfect, polished, insincere. I leaned back, swallowing the bitter taste that always rose when I saw her face. She stood at a podium during what the news anchor called the inaugural gala for the Margaret D. Whitmore Foundation. The headline beneath read, Daughter honors late philanthropist with new education fund. Daughter, singular. No mention of me. No mention of Margaret's wishes beyond a carefully crafted narrative that painted Savannah as the lone visionary behind the foundation. I opened my inbox. Felicia had sent me 3 PDFs and a terse message. We need to build the public record. Don't make noise. But start planting truth. Across the room, my phone buzzed. Jasmine was calling. I answered without thinking, propping the phone up against a mug as her face appeared on screen. Hey, she said softly. You look like you haven't blinked in an hour. Because I haven't, I muttered, hitting play again. Savannah continued her speech, thanking donors and mentioning a family legacy of service and sacrifice. She gestured toward a slideshow of black and white photos of Margaret, skipping over every image that included me. I don't exist in her story, I whispered. Because you're a threat to the version she wants the world to remember, Jasmine replied. So make yourself unforgettable. That's when I remembered. There had been an interview, years ago. Margaret on a PBS special, sitting in our garden with her hair pinned up, talking about the day she and I started the Books Beyond Borders program together. She'd looked straight into the camera and said, "It was Lauren's idea. I just gave her the seed money." I tore through my external hard drive, my fingers trembling. It took 20 minutes, but I found it. Community Voices with Eleanor Kane, episode 92. The video was grainy, but the quote was there. Clear, undeniable. I sent it to Felicia. Within seconds, she replied, "Timestamp it. Pull transcript. Compare it with Savannah's press release. I copied both side by side, watching the contradictions stack up like dominoes." Savannah claimed she was the founder, claimed she'd spent 10 years developing it. But Margaret's voice on that video told a different story. And so did the old articles in the Charleston Tribune, where I'd been photographed presenting books at our first school partnership event. I didn't need to shout. I just needed the right person to whisper to. I opened a new tab and searched. Eleanor Kane, journalist. She was semi-retired now, but her website was still active. There was a discreet contact form labeled, "Confidential tips accepted. Use your discretion." I always do. I drafted a message. "You knew Margaret. You interviewed her. You knew what she stood for. The public narrative is changing, but I have documentation, recordings, and contradictions. I don't want credit. I want the truth to matter again." I attached the clip, the articles, a side-by-side breakdown of Savannah's statements, and hit send. Less than an hour later, a message landed in my inbox. From Eleanor Kane. Subject finally. "I've been waiting for this. Let's talk. Off the record." The silence in my apartment felt different after that. Less like defeat. More like the pause before a storm. A single clause in Margaret's trust changes everything. In the event of undue pressure, the secondary beneficiary shall assume control. The office was quiet except for the ticking of a brass desk clock and the shuffling of pages under Felicia's hands. Evening light stretched long shadows across the room, casting a golden hue over her desk strewn with legal pads, highlighters, and an untouched cup of coffee gone cold. Felicia looked up, her eyes sharp despite the fatigue in her shoulders. "There it is," she said, tapping the page. "Clause 17B. It's not boilerplate. Margaret wrote this with intent." I leaned forward. The clause was brief but devastating in implication. If it could be proven that coercion, manipulation, or undue influence had played a role in Margaret's final public will, the trust, with all its legal weight, would supersede it. And I, as the named secondary beneficiary, would assume full authority. "She planned for this," I murmured. "She knew they might try something." Felicia didn't smile, but her mouth twitched. Satisfaction, maybe. "She gave us a sword," she said, "but we still need a shield." We worked in tense coordination, Felicia dictating notes to her paralegal, a calm woman named Justine who typed with ruthless efficiency. I scanned through every affidavit and signature log. Somewhere in the blur of legal jargon, my own breath evened out. There was purpose in this, not vengeance. Structure. 2 hours later, Felicia printed the injunction. "It freezes all estate-related assets until the hearing," she explained. "Bank accounts, real estate transfers, even disbursements from Savannah's fake foundation. If we can argue undue influence credibly, this will hold." I stared at the form. My name at the top. Savannah's and Diane's names listed under contesting parties. Then came the email. Justine's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then passed it to Felicia, who read silently before flipping the screen to me. It was from Hoffman and Gates, a boutique law firm infamous for their aggressive tactics. The message was crisp and curt. Your client's baseless allegations are defamatory and disruptive. We intend to file a motion to dismiss and request sanctions if this harassment continues. Felicia raised an eyebrow. Thinly veiled threat, she said. But the motion to dismiss is real. We'll need to prepare discovery responses, and fast. Let them try, I said. It just means we're a threat. She slid the filing across the table and handed me a pen. Sign here. Once this is submitted, it's public. There's no going back. I pressed the tip of the pen to the page. My hand didn't shake. Not anymore. Click. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. I signed. Initials on every line, date neatly scribbled at the bottom. When I finished, I looked up and met Felicia's gaze. She nodded once, a silent affirmation. We had entered the ring. By the time we left the office, the city had gone dark. The rain had returned, slicking the sidewalks and drumming softly on the windshield as we walked to our cars. The air smelled like petrichor and rising tension. I unlocked my phone to check for updates. One new message. No name, no number, just a gray bubble. Withdraw now or you'll lose more than money. I read it twice. Then once more, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I showed it to Felicia, who frowned. Anonymous threats are a sign we've hit a nerve, she said quietly. That means you're dangerous now. But all I could feel was the cold chill settling at the base of my spine. Not fear, not yet. Just the awareness that someone, somewhere, was watching. And they were getting nervous. The documents were gone. The drawer I had locked was cracked open, and the photocopies disappeared. The silence in my apartment felt louder than it ever had. Rain tapped on the windows like fingers trying to break in, but the true invasion had already occurred. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, unable to comprehend how something so crucial could simply vanish. My breath hitched, and I reached for the drawer again, praying I had somehow imagined it. But the smooth glide of it opening confirmed the lock had been tampered with. It wasn't shattered. It was picked. Clean. Quiet. Jasmine burst through the door moments later, her eyes darting from my face to the drawer. Lauren? I couldn't speak. I just pointed. She came over, peered inside, and her expression collapsed into the same dread sitting in my chest. Oh my God. Inside, everything else was in place. My laptop still sat on the desk. My handbag was untouched. The kitchen counters were undisturbed. Whoever came in wasn't after money. They didn't want to steal. They wanted to erase. Felicia had warned me. Make digital backups. They'll play dirty. I'd thought she was being overly cautious. I'd thought we had time. I had the originals. And copies. I whispered, trying to remember every step I'd taken after retrieving the documents from Vermont. They were all right here, last night. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. We need to call the police. By the time the officer arrived, the rain had turned into a full downpour. He stood in the entryway with an expression that hovered between boredom and mild irritation. After a 10-minute scan of the apartment, he returned with his hands on his hips. No signs of forced entry, he said, as though that solved everything. They picked the lock. Jasmine snapped. Nothing else is missing. Could have been a roommate or a mix-up with housekeeping. Are you sure you didn't move the documents yourself? I live alone, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. And no, I didn't move them. They were here. He sighed and filled out a basic report, offering me a card with a generic case number and the assurance that these things happen. Then he left, umbrella up, disappearing into the curtain of rain outside. I sat down slowly, feeling the ground shift under me. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and called Felicia. They broke in, I said when she answered. The drawer, the trust copies, gone. What? Her voice turned sharp. Do you have the scanned versions? I nodded as if she could see me. Yes, but not everything. Some were handwritten. Damn it. A rustle of papers echoed on her end. I told you someone might try to intercept. They're scared, Lauren. That means you're over target. Should we still go to court? Of course. But this puts pressure on us to find more. A judge won't like missing originals, even if we have copies. What do I do now? My voice cracked. Don't stay there tonight. And whatever files you still have, upload them. All of it. Encrypted. After we hung up, Jasmine packed a duffel bag for me while I backed up every folder on my laptop into the cloud. Even my journals. Even the audio memos. I encrypted them and emailed them to Felicia and a secure backup drive. Where should we go? Jasmine asked, zipping the bag. I opened a motel app on my phone and booked a 2-night stay at a nondescript spot 15 miles away. It wasn't glamorous, but it had a deadbolt and 2 exits. The motel room was dim, with cracked beige wallpaper and a humming fridge. I stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep, every creak and thump sending my pulse into overdrive. Jasmine had drifted off on the second bed, but I could tell from her tense breathing she wasn't sleeping soundly either. The next morning, while I sipped lukewarm motel coffee and scanned my inbox, an email from Felicia hit my phone like a thunderclap. Subject: Motion filed against you, Lauren. Savannah's team filed a subpoena request. They're trying to access your email history, citing emotional distress and slander. It's a stall tactic, but they're getting aggressive. We need to prepare. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. They're trying to flip the story, I murmured. Jasmine sat up from the bed, rubbing her eyes. What now? I turned to her. My voice was low but clear. If they want war, they'll get it. Grandma had one rule: document everything. It turns out she followed her own advice, obsessively. Rain tapped against the window pane of the tiny motel room as I pulled the envelope from the bottom of my bag. The label was in her neat, elegant handwriting. For Lauren's eyes only. Jasmine leaned in close, her expression tense, while Felicia stood behind us with arms folded, uncharacteristically silent. The room smelled faintly of old linens and microwave popcorn from the lobby, but none of us cared. My fingers trembled as I peeled the seal and found a flash drive tucked between 2 layers of cardstock. No note, no explanation, just this. A quiet promise in plastic and metal. I inserted it into my laptop, heart racing as the screen flickered to life. The video opened with Margaret sitting in her favorite armchair. Her gray hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a pale blue cardigan. Her eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, were sharp. She looked directly into the camera, adjusted it slightly, and began to speak. If you're seeing this, sweetheart, then something's gone terribly wrong. Jasmine reached for my hand, gripping it tight. I want to be clear, Margaret continued. Savannah's been pressing me. Diane, too. They come here with coffee and smiles, but they ask questions. They suggest alternatives. That maybe Lauren isn't ready. That maybe I should reconsider the trust. She paused, letting out a long breath. But I haven't. My mind is my own. Lauren has stood by me. She's the only one who brought me books when I couldn't read, who sat beside me when I forgot the date. I haven't changed my will. The trust remains intact. If they say otherwise, they're lying. She leaned forward, voice lowering. October 2nd, 2023. Savannah came alone, tried to get me to sign something. I pretended not to understand, but I recorded it. You'll find that too, Lauren. I've hidden everything in the drawer by my bed, under the false bottom. She looked away briefly, then back. I know this family, and I know how cruel they can be when they're cornered. If they've cut you out, it's not because you failed. It's because you frightened them. You're more me than either of them would like to admit. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear dropped onto the keyboard. Jasmine reached over and dabbed it away with her sleeve. The video continued. Margaret listed out dates of meetings with her attorney, Felicia Morgan, and outlined in deliberate detail the difference between the public will and the private trust. She spoke of her diagnosis, early-stage dementia, but emphasized repeatedly that, as of each date she mentioned, she had been declared legally competent. she finished with a whisper. Don't let them erase you. I left you the map. Now light the fire. The screen faded to black. Silence filled the room. Even the rain seemed to pause. I closed the laptop slowly, unable to speak. Felicia was the first to move. She stepped forward, eyes wide, and placed her hand over the laptop. This isn't just testimony. This is the smoking gun. I turned to her. There was a new kind of calm in my chest, the kind that follows grief but precedes battle. My voice came out steady, deliberate, the kind of voice I'd never heard from myself before. Felicia turned to Lauren. We're going to court, and they're going to wish they never touched your name. I didn't plan to speak at the court hearing until Savannah smirked at me from across the room. Charleston Probate Court was quieter than I imagined it would be. The rain tapped lightly against the tall stained glass windows, casting soft red and blue hues across the courtroom tiles. The air was heavy, every breath filled with history and judgment. It was early morning, but the room already throbbed with tension. Everyone wore their finest, Savannah in a cream suit that probably cost more than my rent, Diane draped in a shawl as if mourning, and Robert standing tall but ghostly pale, his hands clasped behind his back. I took my place beside Felicia, who, as always, looked utterly unshaken. Her navy suit was crisp, papers organized, voice low but razor sharp. The Judge Hamlin sat high above us, his stern face unreadable. His eyes flicked over the documents Felicia had submitted earlier, the sealed envelope containing Margaret's trust, her video testimony, and all the careful evidence we had gathered over the past weeks. Savannah leaned forward on her side, whispering something to her lawyer, who chuckled quietly. I saw the smirk before she turned her head and met my eyes. It wasn't just arrogance, it was a message. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. Something inside me cracked. Not in defeat, but in resolve. Felicia began. She laid out the framework of our case with surgical precision, her voice cutting through the still air like the first strike in a duel. Your Honor, we are requesting a temporary injunction on the execution of Margaret Langford's contested will. What we present today is clear evidence of undue influence, document manipulation, and a concealed trust previously unacknowledged by the beneficiaries now attempting to claim her estate. Savannah's lawyer, a lean man named Gregory Price, stood as soon as she paused. Let's not pretend this is anything more than a desperate cash grab by a disappointed relative. Miss Langford? He gestured toward me without even looking. Has a history of emotional instability and estrangement from the family. That this trust appears only now, weeks after the reading of the will, should make any reasonable person question its authenticity. I felt Felicia shift beside me. Calmly, she said, We expected this. Which is why the trust was notarized months before Margaret Langford's passing, and why the enclosed digital testimony will show, in Margaret's own words, her clear and conscious intent. Words can be coached, Price fired back. A dying woman's statement may be heartfelt but not necessarily rational. We have medical records that show... Judge Hamlin raised a hand. I will determine the admissibility of any medical evidence in due time, Mr. Price. He turned toward Felicia. You mentioned a video diary? Felicia nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We have provided a sealed copy for chamber review. It includes time-stamped entries from Mrs. Langford discussing her estate, her concerns, and her instructions for her granddaughter Lauren, all recorded independently weeks before her death. The judge nodded slowly, scribbling a note on his pad. My palms were sweating. I hadn't planned on saying a word today. Felicia had told me I didn't have to. But when I looked across the courtroom and saw Savannah's smile deepen, that calculated cruelty she wore so effortlessly, I stood. Felicia glanced at me but didn't stop me. Judge Hamlin looked up. Miss Langford? He asked. I would like to testify, Your Honor. Briefly. He gestured toward the front. Proceed. I walked slowly to the stand, every step echoing louder than it should. My throat was dry, my fingers trembling slightly, but I felt something solid behind my ribs. Margaret. I looked at Savannah first. My grandmother raised me. When I was 10, she taught me to bake bread and told me I could turn grief into something warm if I tried hard enough. When I was 18, she gave me a book of quotes she wrote herself. And 2 months before she passed, she called me and said, "They're circling like vultures, but you'll have the last word if you stay quiet and listen." I turned to the judge. She knew what was coming. She knew how they'd try to erase me. So she left me what mattered. Not just the money, but her voice, her words. Her mind, I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed transcript Felicia had insisted I carry, just in case. I didn't need to read it. I had memorized the lines. She said, "Savannah pushes, but my mind is my own. I know what I want. And it's Lauren." She said that on camera. Lucid, clear, on a date that precedes the version of the will submitted by Savannah and Diane. There was silence. Even Savannah, for once, didn't interrupt. Judge Hamlin cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Langford." I returned to my seat, heart thudding. Felicia didn't smile, but she placed her hand briefly on mine under the table. It was enough. The judge tapped his pen against his notepad. "In light of the submitted testimony and the video materials, I will review all items in private chambers within the next 48 hours. Until then, the estate will remain frozen. No funds shall be dispersed, and no legal authority shall be assumed by any party." He banged his gavel once and stood. We rose as the courtroom began to empty. I felt like I was standing underwater. Slow, weightless, unsure if I should cry or scream. As I turned to leave, Savannah stepped just close enough to murmur in my ear, "That was a mistake. You're going to regret this." Her breath was cold, venom laced behind each word. But I didn't flinch. The day the video was shown in chambers, Diane didn't even come to court, and Savannah sat stone-faced throughout. I arrived early, hands shoved into my coat pockets, the morning chill biting through Charleston's usual humidity. The courthouse loomed above me, gray and still, as if holding its breath. Inside, the air buzzed. Reporters lingered by the steps, legal aides whispered near the elevators, and I caught glimpses of eyes following me as I walked toward Judge Hamlin's chambers. Felicia met me outside the carved oak doors. Her briefcase was heavy in her hand, but she looked calm, focused. When she nodded, I nodded back. The judge had requested a private review of Margaret's video, and no one but he and a court officer would be allowed inside. Felicia had submitted an affidavit authenticating the footage, along with notarized documentation of Margaret's condition on the dates in question. Savannah had shown up without Diane. No statement. No apology. Just cold silence and a pristine white dress, as if she could bleach the suspicion off her reputation. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. She just sat on the opposite bench, unmoving, like a statue made of something brittle. The courtroom was closed while Judge Hamlin reviewed the footage. For an hour, the halls echoed with shuffling feet and distant rain. At one point, I stood near a window, watching the first drops crawl down the glass. It was the kind of day Grandma would have called a reckoning day. Then we were summoned. Everyone rose when Judge Hamlin entered. He looked as if he'd aged a year in that 1 hour. His brow was furrowed, jaw tense, and his eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the room before settling on Savannah. "The court has reviewed the submitted video in full," he began, voice low but firm. Mrs. Margaret Langford appeared mentally competent, articulate, and clear in her intentions throughout the footage. He paused, the weight of his words dragging down the oxygen in the room. "Based on this, and pending further discovery, I am hereby ordering an immediate freeze on all financial transfers, asset reallocations, and estate dispersals related to Mrs. Langford's holdings." A low gasp rippled behind me. I caught Savannah's shoulder twitch, the only sign of life from her side of the room. "This is not a ruling on final inheritance," Hamlin continued. "However, the court finds significant reason to investigate the possibility of undue influence and coercion by named parties, including Ms. Savannah Green and Mrs. Diane Langford. Felicia stood. Your Honor, we request permission to begin discovery on all email communications, phone logs, and estate-related correspondences between those parties and the staff or legal representatives of Margaret Langford during the final 3 months of her life. Granted, Judge Hamlin said immediately. You'll have full access to estate staff records, and a subpoena will be issued to the estate's former legal counsel. Savannah's lawyer stood, pale and rattled. Your Honor, we object to such broad discovery. The implications, the judge interrupted, are that someone may have altered a woman's final wishes for personal gain. That alone warrants full transparency. Savannah's jaw clenched. She still hadn't looked at me, but I could feel her unraveling. The courtroom had shifted. The murmurs were no longer about if she lied, but how far she'd gone. Judge Hamlin straightened a stack of papers on his bench. Ms. Green, let me be clear. If additional evidence of fraud or manipulation emerges, you may be facing not only civil consequences, but criminal charges. She blinked, but said nothing. Her silence was louder than any protest. We were dismissed shortly after. I didn't exhale until we stepped out into the hallway. The storm outside had picked up. Wind howling through the atrium windows, thunder cracking just beyond the tall courthouse pillars. Felicia smiled faintly, just enough for me to feel it. Now, she said, we build the rest of the case. You've done the hardest part. I nodded, still gripping the strap of my bag like it was a lifeline. She would have been proud, wouldn't she? She'd be dancing, Felicia replied. As we stepped toward the elevators, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered hesitantly. Hello? A raspy voice came through the speaker, female, hesitant, afraid. Is this Lauren Langford? Yes. I worked in your grandmother's house, years ago. I wasn't supposed to keep anything, but I did. And there's something you don't know. I need to show you what I kept. The call went dead. I stood frozen, the line still pressed to my ear. Mrs. Tilda handed me a small metal tin. Inside were Margaret's painkillers, and a journal page with Savannah's handwriting. Her house smelled faintly of lemon oil and old lace, the kind of scent that clings to memory like it clings to curtains. The place was small, a shotgun-style home shaded by 2 sprawling magnolia trees whose thick roots lifted parts of the porch. Inside, everything was neat, almost reverent, like time itself had been asked to behave. Mrs. Tilda moved slowly, her hands wrinkled but precise as she motioned for me to sit at her tiny kitchen table. I wasn't sure I'd ever show you this, she said, her voice hoarse with age and worry. But after that call, I couldn't sleep. She reached into a cupboard and brought down an old cookie tin. Not the kind sold for decoration. This one had been used. Scratches scarred its surface, and one of the hinges was nearly broken. My heart thudded against my ribs as she placed it in front of me. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I opened the lid. Inside were 3 things: a small pharmacy bottle with a faded label, a folded sheet of yellowed journal paper, and a cotton ball that smelled faintly of menthol. My hands went cold before I even touched anything. Mrs. Tilda sat down across from me. That's from the week before your grandmother passed, she said. I cleaned her room while Savannah was there. Found the bottle in the bathroom. No, but it didn't match the prescription on the cabinet. And Miss Margaret was confused. Drowsy. Too drowsy. I picked up the bottle. The label had been hastily readhered. It read, lorazepam, not the blood pressure meds Margaret had been taking. The pharmacy label showed a refill date, 2 days before the updated will had been filed. I stared at it, disbelief swirling with dread. I took it home. I shouldn't have, Tilda whispered. But something in me, I knew it was wrong. The journal page was folded tightly. My fingers struggled to undo it without tearing the delicate paper. Margaret's handwriting was careful, looping, unmistakably hers. Savannah brought new pills today. She said they were to help me rest. But I told her no. They made me sleepy yesterday. I don't want to forget things. I don't trust them. And beneath that, in a tighter, messier scrawl, Savannah's. You're overthinking again. Just take them, Margaret. You'll feel better. We'll handle the details, Euro. You just rest. My hands trembled as I laid the page flat. I couldn't speak. She left it on the nightstand, Mrs. Tilda said softly. I don't think she meant to hide it, but when Savannah came back, she threw something away from that room. I saw it in the trash later. Torn paper. I think it was another page. Outside, the magnolia leaves rustled under the pressure of an oncoming storm. The air inside the kitchen had grown heavy, weighted by implication. I reached for my phone and called Felicia. She answered on the first ring. Lauren? I have something, I said. A bottle. A journal entry. The dates matched the week the will changed. A pause. Where are you? Mrs. Tilda's house. I'm coming. Don't let anyone else touch it. By the time Felicia arrived, dusk had crept in. She examined everything carefully, documenting with photos and gloves. Her brow was furrowed the entire time, but when she finally looked up, her eyes were steel. This could constitute elder abuse, she said. And if we prove Savannah intentionally altered her state of mind, this stops being civil. It becomes criminal. Mrs. Tilda sat quietly in the corner, wringing her hands. I never meant harm. I just didn't want it to disappear. You did the right thing, Felicia said gently. This may change everything. Back in the car, I sat in silence. The tin was sealed again and placed in an evidence bag. Felicia would file an emergency motion in the morning. The world outside felt different, like it had cracked open a little, letting something darker crawl into the light. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was a number I recognized. Diane. I hesitated, then answered. Lauren? Her voice was brittle, nothing like the cold matriarch I remembered. It was shaky. Office. Yes. There was a pause. You need to stop this. Please, you don't know what you're about to uncover. It wasn't a threat. It was fear, pure and exposed. And for the first time, Diane sounded scared. I didn't know, Diane sobbed. I thought Margaret wanted Savannah to lead. Her voice cracked as she wrung her hands, standing in the living room that used to smell of chamomile tea and lavender soap. Margaret's favorite space, once warm with lace curtains and the gentle clink of teacups, was now dim, the windows gray with dust and the silence suffocating. Diane stood by the fireplace, shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen before. She didn't look regal or commanding now. She looked like someone who had been pretending for far too long. I sat on the edge of the sofa, the very one where I used to read beside Grandma while she crocheted. The silence between us was thick. Robert hovered near the back wall, arms crossed, his mouth drawn into a tight line. He hadn't said a word since I arrived. Diane had called me that morning, her voice unrecognizable on the phone. Come alone, she'd said. No lawyers. I agreed, on the condition she didn't lie. Now face to face, I didn't have to press her. The guilt was already pouring out. She said it was temporary, Diane whispered. That the sedatives were just to help Margaret rest. She said the doctor approved it, but I never saw a prescription. I never asked. I watched her closely, letting the silence widen like a chasm she'd have to crawl across herself. She was my daughter, Diane said, voice rising. How could I just wanted peace in this house. And Margaret she was getting so difficult, so insistent about you. My throat tightened. She wasn't difficult. She was fighting for clarity, for her voice, and you silenced her. Diane sank into the armchair, the very spot where Margaret had once poured tea and warned me. Even the quietest women must be heard. That memory surged through me now, burning with fresh clarity. I didn't mean to erase you, Diane said. I thought this leadership was what Margaret wanted. Savannah was always loud, I finished for her. And you listened to the loudest voice instead of the truest one. She didn't argue. Robert cleared his throat. I told her we shouldn't have touched anything after the funeral, he muttered, that it wasn't ours to touch, but I let her talk me out of it. My eyes shifted to him. You watched them lock me out. You stood there and said nothing. He looked away, shame etched deep in his brow. The old man who used to bring me lemon drops in his coat pocket wouldn't meet my gaze. Felicia was on speakerphone, muted for now, but listening. She'd advised me to record everything. I hadn't needed to. Diane was volunteering more than I expected. I'll testify, Diane said suddenly. If it means protecting Margaret's legacy, I owe her that. It wasn't absolution, but it was a crack in the stone. I stood. You helped erase me, I said softly, trying to keep the ache out of my voice. You let her do this. You watched her push Grandma into silence. Diane nodded, her face wet and lined with regret. And I'll never forgive myself. The door creaked slightly from a gust of wind. Outside, the garden Margaret had once nurtured now lay in disarray. Overgrown, forgotten, but not dead. I glanced at Felicia's contact photo lighting up again. Another call was coming through. This time, it was from the news. A reporter's headline was already live. Jasmine had sent me the link. Savannah Green denies all allegations. This is character assassination, she says. I tapped the notification. A video played automatically. Savannah, hair perfectly curled, sitting on a plush leather chair with a tasteful backdrop, stared into the camera. All claims against me are lies, she said with practiced ease, and I will fight them in court. Her smile was steady, but her eyes darted once. I closed the screen and exhaled slowly. She wasn't done fighting, but neither was I. The courtroom was packed, and when the judge read the ruling, not a single person moved. I could hear nothing but the echo of Judge Hamlin's voice as he leaned slightly forward, eyes scanning the room over the rim of his glasses. The air was so thick with tension, even the usual shuffle of reporters' pens and heels on marble had ceased. It was as if time held its breath. This court finds that the 2023 will submitted posthumously by Diane Green is invalid, he said. It was obtained under conditions suggestive of undue influence and coercion. Accordingly, the estate shall revert to the trust structure filed and notarized in July 2022, placing full control of Margaret Eleanor Green's assets into the hands of Lauren Elise Green. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until Felicia placed hers gently over mine. Across the aisle, Savannah sat frozen, jaw clenched, her fingers gripping the arms of her chair like a lifeline. Diane was beside her, face pale, eyes red, staring at the floor like the verdict had stripped her of speech. Robert hadn't even come. Gasps rippled through the room. Some were stunned. Others, relieved. The weight of everything we'd fought for had culminated in this moment, and the gavel hadn't even fallen yet. Judge Hamlin continued, his tone steady but final. This court also refers evidence of potential elder abuse, forgery, and will tampering to the district attorney's office for further review. Proceedings will be paused pending investigation. Savannah bolted up. This is insane, she hissed to her lawyer. It was about protecting the family name. She was frail. She didn't know what she wanted. But the courtroom didn't flinch. The press leaned forward. The family friends who had once smiled politely at me now looked away. The illusion had cracked, and the truth spilled out like daylight. Felicia stood, voice composed. Ms. Green, she said, addressing Savannah, you were given every opportunity to explain your actions, but you chose deception. Let it be noted, justice was served because your grandmother was wise enough to leave behind more than just a will. She left her voice. Her warnings, her truth. Savannah scoffed, crossing her arms. This was all for appearances, for legacy. I was preserving the Green name. I rose. Slowly, deliberately, I walked to the center of the room. I didn't need notes. I didn't need Felicia beside me. I met the judge's eyes. Margaret didn't just leave me her money, I said, my voice even. resonating through the wooden panels and hushed onlookers. She left me the truth, the version of her life that wasn't curated for press releases or public image, the one where love didn't come with conditions, where trust wasn't a bargaining chip. I turned to Savannah. You took from her, you took from me, and you tried to turn memory into currency. But Margaret saw you, and she made sure the rest of the world would too. No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence held more than applause ever could. Outside the courthouse, flashbulbs popped the second I stepped into the sunlight. The media had been waiting. The statement Savannah released earlier that morning had only added fuel to the fire, and now everyone wanted my side of the story. Reporters shouted questions. Lauren, is it true your sister drugged your grandmother? Do you plan to sue for damages? What will happen to the family estate? But one voice cut through the rest, calm and pointed. A woman with a steady camera asked, Ms. Green, what will you do now? I paused on the courthouse steps. The weight of my grandmother's ring, which I'd finally retrieved, sat heavy on my finger. I looked past the cameras, past the noise, into the horizon that now felt open for the first time in years. I turned back and smiled faintly. Build what they tried to destroy.